Hello and welcome. I hope all of you are doing very well, and if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to World Affairs in Context on Substack, on Patreon for extra content, and join our community. The United States-China competition is clearly intensifying. China has held one of the most powerful yet very much misunderstood winning cards in global trade. I'm talking about rare earth minerals, of course. And this week, Beijing played that card, and it did it very, very well. At its core, this isn't just about minerals, of course. It is about control, it is about power, and the future of technology, as well as a big blow to the U.S. military-industrial complex. Ahead of the Xi Jinping-Trump summit in South Korea, China announced sweeping new export curbs on rare earth, on lithium-ion batteries, graphite, and even on synthetic diamonds, which is a move that could reshape global supply chains and intensify tensions with Washington. So this happened just days before a high-stakes meeting. U.S. President Trump has already reacted to the announcement. He commented saying, "Well, it appears the upcoming meeting with Xi Jinping is meaningless," said Trump. But of course, it is going to take place. It is too important not to. Additionally, Washington indicated that it is ready to raise the stakes. It is now ready to raise tariffs on China in retaliation. China dominates the field. Everybody knows this. It produces about 70% of the world's rare earth, and it holds nearly half of global reserves. That is not a coincidence. It is not an accident. It is the result of decades of strategic planning, of investments. The United States cannot compete with China in this regard, and Washington fully understands it. The U.S. cannot compete because building an independent rare earth supply chain takes decades, not just several years. It's not just about mining, it is about processing. It is about building refineries, about building magnet plants and end-to-end infrastructure, and also doing so very efficiently to be competitive. Now, back in the 1980s, while the United States was scaling down its mining operations, which we now know was a very unwise decision, China was ramping it up. Its low-cost production flooded the market and eventually drove competitors out of business. By the time most governments realized what was happening, China had built a near monopoly, not just on mining, but on refining and on processing too. A country can mine rare earth all it wants, but it is the processing part that plays the integral role, and China is the leader in that realm. Even if country, like the United States or Australia digs up rare earth, they're often sending them to China for processing. That's how important processing is. China's Ministry of Commerce has declared that any overseas exporter using even traces of Chinese-sourced rare earth will need an export license. This hurts the United States because its military-industrial complex depends on these rare earth minerals exported from China into the United States. So this has a significant impact, and it clearly shows who has the upper hand in trade talks. In plain terms, Beijing is tightening its grip on materials that the rest of the world desperately needs, from EVs, from EV batteries to missile component production. The announcement actually cites national security as the reason, but the timing couldn't be more strategic. It lands right before Xi-Trump meeting, as I mentioned, and it is clear that Beijing will walk into the room with leverage. Well, this time Beijing isn't just targeting rare earth, as I mentioned, which is very important. It is widening the scope to include lithium-ion batteries, graphite, and synthetic diamonds, all essential for the global clean energy transition too. Washington chooses not to discuss its dangerous vulnerability, which is America's military power dependency on minerals that are controlled by China. A new report from Govini, a U.S. defense analytics firm, titled From Rock to Rocket: Critical Minerals and the Trade War for National Security, revealed just how deep that dependency runs. It warns that the American military-industrial base increasingly relies on China for the rare earth elements and critical minerals that make its most advanced weapons possible. When China imposed export restrictions on these minerals in response to US tariffs, it sent a very clear message to Washington. It said Beijing understands the power of supply chains and it is willing to utilize that power. The scale of the U.S. dependence on Chinese exports is staggering. The report found that 80,000 individual components across nearly 1,900 U.S. military weapon systems contain Chinese-sourced minerals. That's nearly 78% of all Department of Defense platforms. The vulnerability actually cuts across every branch of the armed forces. The U.S. Navy relies on Chinese minerals in 92% of its 739 weapon systems. The Air Force, for example, relies on 85% of its 302 systems, and the Army, 70%. Even the Marine Corps has an over 60% reliance on Chinese imports. Think about what that means in practice. For example, the F-35 fighter jet, one of America's most advanced aircraft, contains over 900 pounds of rare earth elements. If China decides to restrict exports further, the production of these high-end systems could slow, stall, or even stop entirely. That is not speculation anymore, it is already happening. And the problem isn't just mining, it's processing. Even when rare earths are extracted from Earth in countries like Australia or Canada, they often still travel to China for refining, as I mentioned earlier. And that's because China controls over 90% of global refining capacity. It is a choke point that even United States allies can't avoid. For example, China supplies 60% of the world's antimony and processes nearly 1/3 of all refined materials worldwide. So in practical terms, only 19% of the antimony that is used by the United States comes from sources outside China's reach. America's most advanced weapons are built with materials that run through China, the country that the United States declared as its main adversary. Fighter jets, missiles, radar systems, and submarines all dependent on rare earth, on magnets, and on critical minerals that China can't control or cut off. So the challenge for the United States is not just to secure raw materials, but to rebuild the entire industrial ecosystem that turns those materials into military power. Now, otherwise, if it doesn't happen, it is fair to say that China has already won. The race for mineral independence is no longer about economics. It is about survival in the next era of great power competition. And if Washington can't win it, perhaps it doesn't need to start a fight with China. With this week's announcement of China restricting exports of rare earth, Beijing just sent a very clear message. Will Washington understand it? That is the important question. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that you consider supporting my work. Become a subscriber here on YouTube, on Substack, on Patreon. I would love to see you on my alternative social media platforms. You will find them linked below. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Take care.